Most people will never be truly dangerous. Not dangerous in the way that matters. Not the kind that makes a room shift when you enter. Not the kind that makes powerful men measure their words carefully around you. They'll stay busy, stay loud, stay distracted, and they will die ordinary, forgotten, replaced without a second thought. But here you are, which already tells me something about you. Machiavelli didn't write for the masses. He wrote for the rare man who understood one ruthless truth. The world doesn't reward kindness. It doesn't reward effort. It rewards the man who has built his mind into something so precise, so cold, so quietly lethal, that others can't compete. They can only observe, only wonder, only wish they understood what you carry behind your eyes. That is the intellect we are forging today. Not louder, not more desperate, sharper, colder, unbreakable. Because the most dangerous thing a man can possess in this world isn't a weapon in his hand. It's a mind so powerful, so ruthlessly disciplined, that people feel it before you even speak. This is dark Vellian, and this is where your transformation begins. Number 1. The mind they feared to give you. Most men walk through life reacting. Something happens, they respond. Someone speaks, they answer. Someone challenges, they crumble or they rage. They are entirely at the mercy of the world around them. They were never taught to think. They were taught to obey, and that was intentional. The people who built this system, the institutions, the structures, the invisible architects of ordinary life, they never wanted you thinking too deeply. A thinking man is dangerous. A man who questions, calculates, and observes without reacting is something they cannot control, and what they cannot control, they fear. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. He watched rulers fall, not because they lacked armies, not because they lacked wealth, but because they lacked the cold, surgical intelligence to see reality as it truly was. Brutal, indifferent, governed by power, not morality. The moment you accept that, everything changes. Your intellect is not about intelligence in the academic sense. It is not about what degrees hang on your wall or how fast you can recall information. It is about perception, the ability to see what others refuse to look at, to understand what others are too comfortable to examine. That is the forbidden edge. The man with a truly dangerous mind doesn't announce himself. He doesn't debate loudly or seek validation in arguments. He watches, he listens, he collects information the way a predator studies its environment, quietly, patiently, without urgency, because he already knows noise is for the weak. Right now, go to the comments and type, "My mind is my empire," because that is exactly what we are building here. Not a personality, not an image, an empire that lives entirely between your ears, that no one can invade, no one can negotiate with, and no one can take from you. Dark psychology teaches one uncomfortable truth that most self-help content will never dare speak. People do not respond to who you are. They respond to what they perceive you to be, which means the man who controls perception controls everything: outcomes, relationships, power. And perception begins in the mind, your mind, the one you have been neglecting, the one that, if sharpened correctly, will make you the most quietly terrifying person in any room you enter. That process starts now. Number 2, silence your mind or the world will colonize it. The average man's mind is not his own. It belongs to whatever last entered it. The news, the argument from this morning, the opinion of someone who hasn't built anything. His thoughts feel like his, but they were planted, carefully, deliberately, by forces that profit from his confusion. This is not conspiracy, this is architecture. The world is specifically designed to keep your attention fractured, your thinking shallow, and your inner voice drowned out by external noise. A man who cannot sit alone with his thoughts for 1 hour is a man who has already been colonized, already defeated. Machiavelli wrote that the prince who relies on others for his judgment will never stand firm. He will shift with every wind, bend with every pressure, and eventually be destroyed by the very people he trusted to think for him. This wasn't just political wisdom. It was a description of every weak man who ever lived. Mental silence is not emptiness. It is the most violent form of discipline available to you. When you train yourself to sit in stillness, to observe your own thoughts without chasing them, without reacting to them, you begin to see the machinery operating beneath your own mind. And that visibility is power most men never access. The man who masters his inner world becomes unreachable. You cannot manipulate someone who already knows what he wants. You cannot destabilize someone who has sat in his own darkness and made peace with it. You cannot rush someone who operates on his own internal clock. He becomes frictionless, ungrippable. Go to the comments right now and type, "I own my mind, I own my world." Say it like you mean it. Because the men who built real power in history didn't just control armies and resources, they controlled themselves first. That self-ownership was the foundation everything else was built upon. Dark psychology identifies this as one of the most feared traits in a human being, the person who is completely self-contained, who needs no external validation, who processes everything internally and reveals only what serves him. People around such a man feel exposed, uneasy, because his stillness holds up a mirror to their chaos. Build that stillness. Protect it ferociously. It is the ground your empire stands on. Number 3. Read people like open wounds. Every person you have ever met is bleeding somewhere. They carry wounds they have never named, fears they have never confessed, and desires so deep they barely admit them to themselves. Most people walk past this entirely. You will not. Because the man with a dangerous intellect learns to read what was never meant to be shown. This is not empathy. Empathy is feeling what others feel. This is something colder. This is the surgical ability to identify what drives a person, what they fear losing, what they desperately need, what invisible insecurity governs every decision they make. Once you see that, you hold something more powerful than any argument. Machiavelli observed that men are driven by two forces above all others: fear and desire. Every behavior, every alliance, every betrayal can be traced back to one of these two roots. The man who can identify which force is operating in another person at any given moment holds an intelligence advantage that cannot be purchased, taught in classrooms, or faked. Watch how people react when they are ignored. Watch what they defend most aggressively in arguments, because what a man defends most violently is what he is most insecure about. Watch what they repeatedly mention without being asked. People reveal their entire psychological architecture constantly. They cannot help it. The wound always speaks. The dangerous man does not react to what people say. He responds to what they mean. These are almost never the same thing. A man who attacks your confidence is advertising his own fragility. A man who questions your decisions is paralyzed by his own. Every projection is a confession. Learn to receive it as intelligence, not offense. Drop in the comments right now and type, "I see what you hide." Because that is the lens we are sharpening. Not cynicism, not manipulation for sport. Pure, cold, accurate perception of human nature in its rawest form. That perception is what separates the man who gets played from the man who is always 3 moves ahead. Dark psychology reveals that the most dangerous readers of people are never the loudest in the room. They are the quietest. They ask little. They observe everything. They store information the way a vault stores gold, silently, securely, and only opened when the moment demands it. Become the vault. Become the reader. Become unreadable yourself. Number 4. Weaponize your knowledge before they weaponize their ignorance against you. Most men consume information the way they consume food. Carelessly, excessively, without intention. They read without applying. They learn without transforming. They collect facts the way others collect possessions, for the comfort of having them, never for the power of using them. That is not intellect. That is decoration. Knowledge without application is the most expensive form of weakness a man can carry. It gives him just enough awareness to feel superior, but never enough transformation to actually become dangerous. He knows the theory of power but bows to it in practice. He understands manipulation intellectually but gets manipulated emotionally. The gap between knowing and becoming destroys most men silently. Machiavelli was not a philosopher who theorized from safety. He was a man who studied power from the inside, who watched princes rise and collapse, who mapped the invisible mechanics of control with cold precision. His knowledge was weaponized because it was earned through ruthless observation, not comfortable study. That distinction matters more than most men will ever understand. Every piece of knowledge you acquire must be immediately pressure tested against reality, not discussed, not posted about, tested, applied, refined. The man who reads about psychological leverage and then uses it in a real conversation that same day is building something permanent. The man who simply nods along is building nothing but an illusion of growth. Your enemies, and you have them whether you acknowledge it or not, are not sitting idle. The people who wish to see you remain small are already operating from a framework. They already have a strategy for keeping you exactly where you are. Ignorance in that environment is not innocence. It is surrender dressed in comfort. Go to the comments and type, "Knowledge is my weapon, silence is my trigger," because that combination is what the truly dangerous man operates from. He arms himself quietly, completely, without announcement, and when he moves, people around him suddenly realize they were never dealing with someone ordinary. Dark psychology identifies weaponized knowledge as the ability to understand systems, human systems, social systems, power systems, and move within them invisibly, not to destroy without reason, but to never be destroyed without choice. The man who understands the game at its deepest level never becomes its casualty. Consume with intention, apply with precision, transform without permission. Number 5. Destroy your need for approval and become genuinely terrifying. There is a poison so deeply embedded in most men that they carry it their entire lives without ever identifying it. It shapes every decision they make, every word they choose, every opportunity they abandon. It is the need for approval, and it is the single most effective leash ever placed around a human being. Watch any man carefully, and you will find it operating. He softens his opinion before speaking it. He laughs at things he doesn't find funny. He shrinks his ambition to fit inside someone else's comfort zone. He edits himself constantly, not for strategy, not for precision, but because somewhere deep inside, he cannot bear the weight of disapproval. Machiavelli was ruthlessly clear on this. The prince who governs by seeking to be loved will always be hostage to the mood of the crowd. Love is borrowed. It changes with circumstance, with convenience, with whoever offers more. But the man who has severed his dependency on external validation, who operates from internal authority alone, cannot be held hostage by anyone. The moment you stop needing people to approve of your direction, your decisions, your silence, your ambition, you become something they have no framework for. They will call it arrogance. They will call it coldness. What they are actually experiencing is the discomfort of encountering a man they cannot influence, and that discomfort is your power confirming itself. Approval seeking is not just weakness, it is a transmission signal. It tells every predator in your environment exactly where your pressure points are. The man who needs validation is the man who can be controlled through praise, destabilized through criticism, and redirected through subtle social pressure. He is permanently manipulable without ever knowing it. Go to the comments right now and type, "I need nothing, I fear nothing, I bow to nothing," because that is the internal architecture of a man who has become genuinely untouchable, not through aggression, not through arrogance, through the cold, unshakable completeness of a man who has made himself whole from the inside. Dark psychology confirms what Machiavelli understood centuries ago. The most uncontrollable human being is the one who has nothing to prove, no image to protect, no validation to chase, no approval to earn. He moves in pure alignment with his own cold, calculated purpose. That man cannot be touched. Become him. Number 6. the art of thinking in dimensions others cannot enter. Ordinary men think in straight lines, action and reaction, cause and effect. They see what is directly in front of them and respond to it literally, predictably, transparently. This is not thinking, this is processing, and a man who only processes will always be outmaneuvered by the man who truly thinks. Dimensional thinking is the ability to hold multiple realities simultaneously, to see not just what is happening, but what it means, what it conceals, what it will produce 3 moves from now, and what invisible force is actually driving it. Most men never develop this. They were never taught it. They were taught to accept the surface. Machiavelli operated in dimensions that his contemporaries couldn't access. While other men reacted to events, he studied the patterns beneath events. While others celebrated victories, he was already mapping the vulnerabilities those victories created. While others slept comfortably in the present, he was living architecturally inside the future. That gap in perception was his entire advantage. Begin training yourself to ask questions that most men never think to ask. Not just what is this person saying, but why are they saying it now? Not just what is happening, but who benefits from it happening. Not just what someone is offering, but what they are concealing inside that offer. Every surface has a basement. Most men never go downstairs. The man who thinks in dimensions becomes impossible to deceive at the level that matters. Not because he is paranoid, paranoia is reactive and exhausting, but because his perception is structurally deeper than the deception being attempted against him. The trap was built for a 2-dimensional mind. His mind doesn't live on that floor. Drop in the comments and type, "I think where others cannot breathe," because that is precisely the altitude we are training your mind to operate at. Rarefied, cold, unreachable by ordinary thinking. The kind of mental elevation that makes people feel, without being able to explain why, that you are always several rooms ahead of them. Dark psychology identifies multidimensional thinking as one of the rarest and most feared cognitive traits a person can develop. It cannot be faked. It radiates from a man's presence, his stillness, his unhurried responses. People sense it instinctively and cannot locate its source. They only know one thing. This man sees something they don't. Build that sight, protect it, use it without mercy. Number 7, make your discipline so dark it becomes untraceable. Most men treat discipline like a public performance. They announce their routines, they display their sacrifices, they post their early mornings and their cold showers like trophies, desperately seeking witnesses to their effort, because deep inside, the effort itself isn't enough to sustain them. That dependence on visibility is the exact point where their discipline begins to rot. Real discipline is invisible. It operates in the dark, in the silence, in the moments when no one is watching and nothing external is compelling you forward. It is the man who reads for 2 hours at midnight, not because it looks powerful, but because he is genuinely, hungrily, relentlessly constructing something inside himself that the world hasn't seen yet. That hunger is different. It doesn't need an audience. Machiavelli understood that the prince who reveals the full measure of his preparation hands his enemies a map. The man who quietly disciplines himself in private arrives at the moment of execution appearing almost supernaturally capable. People witness the result and call it talent, call it luck, call it natural ability, because they cannot see the dark, brutal architecture of sacrifice that produced it. Your discipline must become so deeply personal that it feels almost secretive. Not because you are hiding weakness, but because you are protecting power. Every habit you build in silence, every skill sharpened away from observation, every hour invested without documentation compounds into an advantage so dense, so layered that when it finally surfaces, it looks like something that simply cannot be taught. The undisciplined man is permanently at the mercy of his impulses. His mind moves wherever comfort pulls it. His time belongs to whatever demands it loudest. He is not building, he is drifting. And drifting men do not arrive anywhere meaningful. They simply travel in increasingly comfortable circles until they run out of time and realize the circle was always a cage. Go to the comments and write, "My discipline lives where no one can see it," because that is the mark of a man who has separated himself from the performance of growth and committed entirely to the reality of it. That separation alone puts you ahead of 90% of men who will never make that distinction. Dark psychology confirms that untraceable discipline produces something deeply unsettling to observers. A man whose capabilities seem to expand without explanation. No visible struggle, no public grind, just results that keep arriving, cold and inevitable, like a force that was always in motion long before anyone noticed. Build in the dark. Emerge unrecognizable. Number 8. Convert every scar into cold strategic intelligence. Most men are destroyed by what happens to them. They carry their failures like open wounds, their betrayals like permanent identities, their losses like evidence that the world is against them. They become defined by their damage, owned by it, operated by it, and they never once consider that what broke them was also briefing them. Every painful experience you have survived contains intelligence that cannot be purchased, cannot be borrowed, and cannot be fabricated. The man who was betrayed and studied that betrayal with cold precision now carries a blueprint of human deception that no book can fully replicate. Pain, when processed correctly, produces the sharpest form of wisdom available to a living man. Machiavelli wrote that it is better to be feared than loved because love is conditional. It dissolves under pressure, evaporates under inconvenience, and collapses entirely under the weight of self-interest. He knew this not purely from theory. He knew it because he had lived inside power structures that taught him through suffering what comfort never could. His scars became his doctrine. The average man processes pain emotionally and never graduates beyond it. He revisits his wounds for sympathy, for explanation, for someone to confirm that what happened to him was unjust. And it may have been. But justice is irrelevant to power. The only question that matters is whether you extracted the intelligence from the experience or simply bled from it repeatedly. Begin treating every failure as a filed intelligence report. Every person who underestimated you, noted. Every environment that tried to diminish you, studied. Every moment you were outmaneuvered. Dissected without ego, without emotion, with the cold surgical precision of a man who refuses to pay for the same lesson twice. That refusal is where transformation begins. Go to the comments right now and type, "My scars are my most classified intelligence," because that reframe alone separates the man who is victimized by his history from the man who is armed by it. Your past does not define your trajectory, it loads it. Every wound correctly converted becomes ammunition you carry forward invisibly. Dark psychology identifies this conversion process as one of the most powerful forms of self-reconstruction available to a human being. The man who has alchemized his suffering into cold strategic awareness becomes genuinely difficult to destabilize. You cannot threaten a man with pain he has already converted into power. You cannot break what has already been rebuilt into a weapon. Suffer correctly, extract ruthlessly, rise without explanation. Number 9. Engineer your aura until silence becomes your loudest weapon. Most men are terrified of silence. They fill every pause with noise, every void with words, every moment of stillness with unnecessary movement. They talk when they should observe. They explain when they should withhold. They justify when they should simply exist. And in doing so, they hand over the most powerful psychological weapon available. The weapon of controlled presence. Aura is not mysticism. It is not something you are born with or accidentally develop. It is engineered. It is the precise, deliberate result of a man who has mastered his internal world so completely that it radiates outward without effort or announcement. People feel it before they understand it. They respond to it before they can explain why. That gap between feeling and explanation is where your power lives. Machiavelli understood that the prince who controlled perception controlled reality, not the man who was most virtuous, most vocal, or most visibly active, but the man whose presence alone communicated authority. whose stillness suggested depth, whose silence suggested that whatever lived inside him was too vast, too cold, too calculated to be carelessly released into ordinary conversation. Your words must become rare enough to be valuable. When a man speaks constantly, his words lose gravitational pull. They become background noise. But the man who speaks selectively, deliberately, only when his words will land with surgical precision, that man's voice carries weight that others physically feel. People lean in, they quiet themselves, they wait. That waiting is dominance. Study how you currently occupy space. Do you shrink instinctively in certain environments? Do you over-explain your decisions? Do you fill silence with nervous energy? These are not personality traits. They are fractures in your presence that leak power continuously. Every unnecessary word spoken is authority surrendered. Every nervous movement is confidence hemorrhaging invisibly from your frame. Go to the comments and type, "My silence speaks what words cannot carry," because that is the frequency a truly powerful man operates on, not the frequency of noise, performance, or constant visibility. The frequency of a man so internally complete, so cold and self-possessed, that his mere presence in a room rearranges its dynamics without a single word spoken. Dark psychology confirms that engineered aura is among the most destabilizing forces one human being can project onto others. It triggers ancient, instinctive responses, the recognition of a predator, the awareness of something operating on a level they cannot match. They cannot articulate what unsettles them. They only know that around you, they feel measurably smaller. Engineer that feeling. Protect it with silence. Deploy it without mercy. Number 10. The final architecture. Build the mind they will never forget. You have arrived at the end of this video, but understand something cold and permanent. This is not a conclusion. This is a threshold. Most men will watch this, feel the electricity of it, and then return to exactly who they were before pressing play. That is not weakness. That is the gravitational pull of an unbuilt mind resisting its own reconstruction. The intellect we have been constructing throughout this video is not built in a single sitting. It is not a revelation you experience once and carry forever. It is forged, repeatedly. In the darkness of consistent application, in the silence of undistracted focus, in the cold discipline of a man who has decided, without negotiation, without conditions, that mediocrity is no longer a language he speaks. Machiavelli's deepest teaching was never about manipulation. It was never purely about power over others. At its most ruthless core, it was about the absolute, uncompromising mastery of self. The man who has conquered his own mind, his impulses, his fears, his need for comfort, his addiction to approval, has conquered the only territory that was ever truly his to own. Every section of this video was a layer of that architecture, reading people, weaponizing knowledge, engineering silence, converting suffering, thinking in dimensions others cannot access. These are not separate skills. They are interconnected, load-bearing walls of a single structure, the structure of a mind so formidably built that it shocks people simply by existing near them. The world will not celebrate this construction. It will not reward you publicly for the invisible war you are waging against your own limitations. The people around you may not even notice the transformation until suddenly, without warning, they realize they are dealing with someone entirely different from the man they thought they knew. That delayed recognition is your confirmation. Go to the comments right now and type, "I am the architecture they were never prepared for," because that is precisely what you are becoming. Not a louder version of who you were, not a more aggressive or more desperate version. A colder, sharper, more precise and more complete version. The version that was always possible and is now finally being built. Dark psychology and Machiavellian philosophy converge at exactly this point. The man who builds his mind with ruthless intentionality becomes the rarest thing this world produces. Not just successful, not just powerful, genuinely, quietly, permanently untouchable. A force that moves through the world, leaving impressions that outlast his presence and echoes that outlast his words. If this video reached something real inside you, like it, share it, subscribe to Dark Vellian, and turn on notifications. Because what we build here is not content, it is architecture. And the next layer is already waiting for you.